The kitchen tiles were cold beneath my bare feet, a sharp contrast to the feverish heat crawling up my spine. I pressed my palm against the marble countertop, trying to steady myself as the room tilted slightly to the left. The remains of dinner sat between Marcus and me, his plate clean, mine barely touched. He'd made my favorite, chicken piccata with roasted vegetables. The lemon butter sauce had tasted slightly off, bitter almost, but I'd attributed it to my pregnancy cravings warping my taste buds. "You look pale, Claire," Marcus said, his voice carrying that familiar note of concern that had once made me feel cherished. Now, 6 months pregnant and exhausted from working double shifts at Russo's, the upscale Italian restaurant downtown, I couldn't tell genuine worry from condescension anymore. I swallowed hard, my throat feeling thick, just tired. "The baby's been kicking all day," he stood, walking around the small dining table of our modest apartment. His footsteps were measured, deliberate. When he reached me, his hand settled on my shoulder, fingers pressing just a little too firmly. The scent of his cologne, something cheap and cloying, mixed with the lingering aroma of lemon and butter, making my stomach churn. "Claire," his voice dropped lower, "I need to tell you something." The fluorescent light above us flickered, casting strange shadows across his face. For the first time in our 3 years of marriage, I noticed how his eyes had hardened, how the softness I'd fallen in love with had calcified into something else entirely. "I poisoned you." The words hung in the air like smoke. My brain struggled to process them, to arrange them into a sentence that made sense. The refrigerator hummed. A car alarm wailed somewhere outside our third-floor window. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Marcus's grip tightened on my shoulder. "The dinner. I put something in your food. You have maybe an hour? Maybe less. I'm not entirely sure." Victor wasn't specific about the timeline. Victor. The name sent ice through my veins despite the heat consuming my body. Victor Kozlov, the loan shark Marcus had been dealing with for months. The man whose money had paid for the new car Marcus insisted we needed, whose cash had covered the gambling debts I hadn't known existed until the threatening calls started 3 weeks ago. My legs buckled. Marcus caught me, lowering me into the dining chair with surprising gentleness. The irony wasn't lost on me. Poisoning me, then stopping me from falling. "Why?" My voice cracked. I pressed a hand to my swollen belly, feeling our daughter move beneath my palm, the baby. Victor said if I cleared my debt this way, he'd forgive everything. "A life for a life," he said. Apparently I took something that belonged to someone important, someone connected to him. Marcus crouched before me, and I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, or just fear of what he'd done. I didn't know what else to do, Claire. They were going to kill me. The room spun harder. I tried to stand, but my limbs felt heavy, disconnected. My vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in like spilled ink. You killed us." My hand remained on my stomach, protective even as terror consumed me. "Your daughter. I'm sorry." But he was already backing away, grabbing his jacket from the chair. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I have to go. I can't be here when it happens. They'll think I'm involved if I stay." He was at the door before I could respond, before I could scream or cry or beg. The lock clicked. His footsteps faded down the hallway. I was alone. The panic hit like a physical force. I lunged for my phone on the counter, my fingers clumsy and numb. 911. I had to call 911, but as I grabbed the device, a wave of nausea rolled through me so violently I doubled over, the phone clattering to the floor. Poison. He'd actually poisoned me. What kind of poison? How much time did I have? My medical knowledge was limited to basic first aid from a community college course 5 years ago. I needed help. I needed... A knock at the door. 3 solid raps, purposeful and commanding. My head snapped up, hope and terror warring in my chest. Had Marcus come back? Had he realized what he'd done, come back to save me? I crawled toward the door, my body refusing to cooperate. Every movement felt like pushing through concrete. The knocking came again, more insistent. "Help!" I managed to call out, my voice weak. "Please, help." The door handle turned. It wasn't locked from the outside. Marcus had left it open. Why had he left it open? The door swung inward, and the hallway light silhouetted a figure that made my breath catch for an entirely different reason. He was tall, over 6 feet easily, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. The fabric caught the light as he moved, expensive and perfectly tailored. Behind him, 2 men in dark clothing flanked the doorway, their postures alert, hands resting near their waists in a way that suggested weapons, but it was the man in front who commanded every particle of my attention. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and shadowed planes. His eyes were the color of smoke, gray and penetrating, and they fixed on me with an intensity that made me forget, for just a moment, that I was dying on my kitchen floor. He moved into the apartment with fluid grace, his leather shoes barely making a sound. The scent that preceded him was different from anything in my world, expensive cologne layered with something darker, dangerous. Smoke and cedar and something metallic that made my survival instincts scream. Claire Donovan. His voice was deep, accented. Russian, I realized, not a question, a statement. He knew my name. One of the men behind him closed the door while the other remained in the hallway. The main figure crouched before me, and I found myself staring into those gray eyes, watching as they assessed me with clinical precision. His face revealed nothing, no sympathy, no malice, just cold evaluation. "What did he give you?" The question was direct, commanding. I don't... My tongue felt thick. He said poison. Victor told him to... Something flickered across his face, brief, barely perceptible, but there. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Dmitri. He didn't raise his voice, didn't turn around. The man by the door immediately stepped forward. "Call Dr. Volkov. Tell him we have a poisoning, unknown substance, pregnant woman approximately 6 months. We're bringing her in." He stood in one fluid motion, reaching down to lift me as if I weighed nothing. Strong arms slid beneath my knees and back, pulling me against a chest that felt like stone beneath the expensive fabric. The world tilted as he carried me toward the door. "Wait." I tried to protest, but my voice was failing. Who are you?" He paused in the doorway, looking down at me with those inscrutable eyes. The hallway light created a halo behind his head, making him look almost otherworldly. "Alexei Volkov." A pause, weighted and deliberate. "Your husband stole from my organization. He was supposed to return what he took, not..." His eyes dropped to my pregnant belly, something dark and dangerous crossing his features. "Not this." The implication settled over me like a shroud. Marcus hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen from the mafia. And his payment, his way out of debt, had been me, had been our daughter. "Please," I whispered, my hand finding the lapel of his suit jacket, fingers curling into the expensive fabric. "Please save my baby." For the first time, his expression shifted. Something almost human flickered behind those cold gray eyes, surprise maybe, or recognition of something unexpected. "Hold on," he said, and there was a command in those 2 words that made my body obey even as consciousness began to slip away. "Just hold on, Claire." He carried me into the hallway, moving with purpose down the stairs. I felt the night air hit my skin, heard the sound of a car door opening. Leather seats received me, cool and smooth. The scent of the car was overwhelming, leather and that same cedar cologne, mixed with something else. Safety. Impossibly. Voices murmured around me. Dmitri was on the phone, speaking rapid Russian. Another man, the driver, I realized, was starting the engine. And Alexei Volkov, this mafia boss whose name I now knew, was sliding in beside me, one arm supporting my shoulders while his other hand pressed against my wrist, checking my pulse with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. "Stay awake," he commanded, and I felt his hand tap my cheek lightly. "Look at me. Keep your eyes open." I tried. God, I tried. But the darkness was so inviting, and my body was so heavy. "Claire." His voice sharpened. "Your daughter needs you to fight. So fight." My daughter. I forced my eyes open, forced myself to focus on his face, The strong jaw, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the way his gray eyes had darkened to almost black in the car's dim interior. "Why?" I managed to whisper. "Why are you helping?" "Because your husband is a fool who didn't follow instructions," his jaw clenched. "And because no child should pay for their father's sins." The car accelerated, pressing me back into the seat. Through the window, I watched the lights of the city blur into streams of gold and white. My apartment building disappeared behind us. Everything I'd known, my entire life with Marcus, was receding like a dream. Or maybe this was the dream, being carried away by a stranger in an expensive suit, a dangerous man who commanded with just his presence, who'd appeared at my door exactly when I needed saving. But as my vision darkened and my consciousness began to slip away despite my best efforts, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. Marcus had left the door unlocked. He'd poisoned me, told me about it, and left the door unlocked. And exactly 30 minutes later, Alexei Volkov had knocked. This wasn't rescue. This was something else entirely. I woke to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of monitors. My hand immediately went to my stomach, panic flooding through me before I even opened my eyes. The bump was still there, and beneath my palm, I felt movement, a small kick, then another. Relief crashed over me so powerfully that tears leaked from the corners of my closed eyes. "She's awake." The voice was unfamiliar, female, with the same Russian accent I'd heard in the car. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the soft light. The room wasn't a hospital, at least not any hospital I'd ever seen. The walls were a warm cream color. The bed I lay in was larger and more comfortable than any hospital bed, and the medical equipment, while present, seemed almost decorative in how seamlessly it blended with the elegant furnishings. A woman in her 50s stood beside my bed, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing scrubs that somehow looked designer. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Dr. Volkov," she said, checking the IV in my arm. "You're very lucky. Another 20 minutes and we wouldn't have been able to reverse the effects." Dr. Volkov. The same last name as... Where am I? My voice was hoarse, my throat raw. "Mr. Volkov's private medical facility. You've been unconscious for 18 hours. She made notes on a tablet, her movements efficient. "The baby is fine. Strong heartbeat. Active movements. Whatever protection instinct made you eat so little of that dinner saved both your lives." The baby. Our daughter. I pressed my hand harder against my stomach, feeling the reassuring movement beneath. What did he give me? Oleander extract, mixed with something to mask the taste. Crude but effective. Her expression darkened. "Your husband clearly didn't research his method. The dose was high enough to kill, but slow enough that we had time to intervene with activated charcoal and gastric lavage. You'll feel weak for a few days, but there should be no lasting damage to you or the baby." Oleander. I'd seen those flowers in the park, beautiful pink blossoms that I'd admired while walking home from work. The irony was bitter. Marcus had killed me with something beautiful. Except I wasn't dead. "I want to see my husband." The words came out harder than I intended. "Dr." Volkov's eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing. "I need to talk to him. I need to understand why. Your husband is no longer a concern." The new voice froze me. Alexei Volkov stood in the doorway, once again in an impeccable suit. This one navy with a white shirt open at the collar. In the daylight filtering through the room's large windows, I could see him more clearly. He was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe early 30s, with the kind of face that would make people stop and stare anywhere he went. But it was his eyes that held me, those gray eyes that seemed to see through everything. What does that mean? I tried to sit up, but my body protested. Dr. Volkov moved to help me, adjusting the bed so I was reclined but upright. Alexei walked into the room with that same fluid grace I remembered, his presence seeming to fill every corner. "Doctor." Volkov excused herself quietly, and suddenly I was alone with him. He pulled a chair close to the bed, closer than was strictly necessary, and sat, his attention fixed entirely on me. "It means," he said, his voice carrying that same command as the night before, that Marcus Donovan has been dealt with according to our laws. He stole from my organization, then attempted to murder you instead of returning what he took. In my world, there are consequences for such actions." The careful phrasing didn't hide the truth. Marcus was dead. My husband, the father of my child, the man who'd promised to love me forever in a small courthouse ceremony 3 years ago, dead. I should have felt something. Horror, maybe. Grief. But all I felt was a hollow numbness. "He tried to kill me," I heard myself say. "He tried to kill our baby, yes." Alexei's eyes never left my face. "Which brings us to the matter of what happens next." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in the chair, one ankle crossing over his knee in a pose that should have looked casual, but somehow looked predatory. "Your husband stole $200,000 from one of my business accounts. Money that belonged to several important people. People I cannot simply tell that the debt died with the thief. $200,000, the number was incomprehensible. Marcus and I struggled to pay our $800 rent each month. Where had that money even gone? "I don't have that kind of money," I said, my voice small. "I'm a waitress. I work at Russo's downtown. I make maybe $30,000 a year. I have $300 in my checking account and student loan debt that I'll never pay off. I can't. I know everything about you, Claire." He cut me off, but not unkindly. "I know you work 50-hour weeks at Russo's. I know you've been sending money to your mother in Ohio for her medical bills. I know you're 6 months pregnant with a girl you plan to name Sophie. I know you have a degree in art history that you can't use because the job market collapsed. I know Marcus gambled away every dollar he earned and then started gambling with money that wasn't his." The comprehensive nature of his knowledge should have terrified me. Instead, I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the hospital gown I wore. "Then you know I can't pay you back," I said quietly. "No," he agreed, "you can't. Which is why I'm offering you an alternative." The word alternative hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I'd read enough, seen enough movies, to know what men like Alexei Volkov might want as alternative payment. My hand moved protectively to my stomach. "I'm 6 months pregnant," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you think—" "I think," he interrupted, and there was something almost like amusement in his eyes, "that you're jumping to conclusions. I'm not interested in your body, Claire. I'm interested in your daughter." The world stopped. "No." The word came out as a gasp. "No, you can't. Listen before you panic." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, bringing his face closer to mine. This close, I could see flecks of darker gray in his eyes, could smell that cedar cologne mixed with something sharper. "I'm not taking your child. I'm offering you both protection." "Protection from what?" "You're the threat." "Am I?" His head tilted slightly, and the gesture was so predatory that my breath caught. "Your husband owed money to Viktor Kozlov before he stole from me. Viktor works for people who work for people who eventually work for me, but the chain is long and complicated. When Marcus stole that money, he didn't just steal from me, he stole from every link in that chain. Men who don't care about pregnant women or innocent children. Men who will come looking for that debt." "But Marcus is dead," I said, my voice rising. "You killed him. Doesn't that satisfy them? In my world, Claire, debts transfer. You were his wife. You carry his child. His blood runs in her veins." He reached out, and I flinched, but he only gestured to my stomach without touching. "To certain people, that makes you both liable for his crimes." The implication settled over me like a cold blanket. "So I'm never safe. She's never safe. Not unless you're under my protection." He sat back again, his expression unreadable. "Which is what I'm offering. You and Sophie will live in my household. You'll be provided for, protected, kept safe from anyone who might come collecting on Marcus's debt. In exchange, you'll be your prisoner," I finished bitterly. "Be my ward," he corrected. "There's a difference. You'll have your own space, your freedom within certain boundaries. you'll want for nothing. Your daughter will grow up safe, educated, protected. Your mother's medical bills will be paid. All of them, including future treatments. It was too much. Too generous. Men like Alexei Volkov didn't offer something for nothing. What's the catch? I asked. What do you really want? For the first time, something flickered across his face, an expression I couldn't quite read. Loyalty, he said simply. Complete, absolute loyalty. You'll belong to my household, which means you follow my rules, accept my protection, and never betray my trust. You'll tell no one about my business, speak to no authorities, make no attempt to leave without permission. So I am a prisoner. You're alive, he countered. Which is more than you would be in 24 hours if I put you back in that apartment. Victor's people are already watching your building. They know Marcus is dead. They know you survived. How long do you think you'd last? He was right, and I hated that he was right. I had no money, no protection, no way to defend myself or my unborn daughter against the kind of people who poisoned pregnant women to settle debts. I need to think, I said. But even as I said it, I knew there was nothing to think about. There was only one choice, and he knew it as well as I did. Of course. He stood, smoothing his suit jacket. You have until tomorrow morning. Dr. Volkov says you'll be strong enough to move by then. You can either come with me to safety, or I'll have Dmitri drive you back to your apartment and wish you the best of luck. He walked to the door, then paused, looking back at me over his shoulder. For what it's worth, Claire, I meant what I said last night. No child should pay for their father's sins. That includes Sophie. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the beeping monitors and the impossible choice that wasn't really a choice at all. I spent the rest of the day in that strange medical room, Dr. Volkov checking on me periodically, bringing me food I could barely taste, and water I forced myself to drink for the baby's sake. Through the window, I could see manicured grounds, gardens that looked like they belonged to an estate, not a medical facility. Where exactly was I? Evening came, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A young woman brought me dinner, real dinner, not hospital food. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. The kind of meal I'd served at Russo's but could never afford to eat. I picked at it, my mind spinning in circles. Every scenario I imagined ended badly. Going back to my apartment meant death, mine and Sophie's. Staying under Alexei Volkov's protection meant... what? A gilded cage? A life of owing a debt I could never repay? But Sophie would be safe. That's what mattered. Sophie would live. The door opened without a knock. I expected Dr. Volkov, but it was Alexei again, this time in more casual clothing. Dark slacks and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with tattoos I couldn't quite make out in the dim lighting. Have you decided? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Do I really have a choice? Everyone has choices, Claire. The question is whether you can live with the consequences. He moved into the room, not approaching the bed, but going to the window, looking out at the darkening grounds. I'm not a good man. I won't pretend to be. The world I live in is violent and unforgiving. But I protect what's mine. Absolutely. Completely. Nothing and no one touches what belongs to me. The possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. I'm not a possession. No, he agreed, turning to face me. The dying light cast half his face in shadow, making him look dangerous and beautiful all at once. You're a responsibility, one I'm choosing to accept. Why? The question burst out of me. Why do you care? You could just let me die. You could let Victor's people handle it. Why does it matter to you? He was silent for a long moment, and I thought he might not answer. Then, because 7 years ago, someone I cared about was murdered over a debt that wasn't theirs. Someone innocent who got caught in the crossfire of our world. I couldn't save them. His eyes met mine, and I saw something raw there, quickly shuddered. I can save you. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even really kindness. It was something darker, more complicated. Redemption, maybe, or penance. But it was real. Okay, I whispered. Okay, I'll accept your protection. For Sophie. Something shifted in his expression. Satisfaction, maybe? Or relief? He nodded once, decisive. Tomorrow, then. Dmitri will have everything prepared. He walked to the door, and I thought he'd leave without another word. But he paused, his hand on the doorframe. Claire? Yes? Welcome to the family. The door closed behind him, and I was left staring at the darkening sky, wondering what family I'd just agreed to join, and what price I'd ultimately pay for Sophie's safety. The estate was overwhelming. Dmitri drove us through gates that looked like they belonged to a fortress, past security checkpoints where men with automatic weapons nodded at our car, and up a winding drive lined with ancient oak trees. When the house finally came into view, I had to suppress a gasp. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion. 3 stories of pale stone and huge windows, with wings extending on either side, and a fountain in the circular drive that looked like it belonged in a European palace. The November morning sun caught the windows, making the whole structure gleam like something out of a dream, or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. Mr. Volkov is waiting inside, Dmitri said, opening my door with surprising gentleness for a man who looked like he could break someone in half. He'd been professional but distant during the drive, answering my questions with short, efficient responses. Yes, the estate was in Connecticut, about 2 hours from the city. No, I wouldn't be able to contact anyone from my old life without Mr. Volkov's permission. Yes, everything I needed would be provided. I climbed out of the car slowly, my body still weak from the poisoning. Dr. Volkov had cleared me medically, but warned me to take it easy for at least another week. The baby kicked as if in protest of all the changes, and I pressed my hand to my stomach reassuringly. It's okay, Sophie, I whispered. We're going to be okay. I wasn't sure if I was lying. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing a woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair pulled back in an elegant twist. She wore a simple black dress that screamed expensive, and her sharp eyes assessed me with the same efficiency I'd seen in Alexei. Mrs. Donovan, she said with a slight accent. Polish, maybe. I'm Katya Novak, the house manager. Welcome. Mr. Volkov is in his office, but asked me to show you to your quarters first. My quarters. As if I were royalty instead of a waitress who'd barely survived being murdered by her own husband 4 days ago. The interior of the mansion was just as impressive as the exterior. Marble floors, high ceilings with ornate molding, artwork that looked like it belonged in museums. Katya led me through hallways that seemed to go on forever, past rooms I caught only glimpses of. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 30, a sitting room with furniture that probably cost more than I'd earn in my lifetime. We climbed a sweeping staircase to the 2nd floor, then down another hallway to a set of double doors. Katya opened them, gesturing me inside. You're sweet, she said simply. Sweet was an understatement. The space was larger than my entire apartment had been. A sitting area with plush sofas and a fireplace, a bedroom with a 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a castle, a bathroom done in white marble and gold fixtures that made me afraid to touch anything. Through another door, I glimpsed a walk-in closet, already filled with clothes. The clothes are in your size, Katya said, following my gaze. Mr. Volkov had them delivered yesterday. If anything doesn't fit or isn't to your taste, let me know and I'll have them replaced. There are maternity clothes as well, of course. Of course. Because Alexei Volkov thought of everything. The nursery is through that door. Katya pointed to another door I hadn't noticed. Mr. Volkov had it prepared when he learned you were keeping the baby. If you'd like any changes made, you need only ask. I walked to the door on numb legs and pushed it open. The nursery was perfect. Soft yellow walls, a white crib with delicate bedding, a rocking chair positioned near the window overlooking the gardens, shelves already stocked with books and stuffed animals, a changing table, a dresser, everything a baby could need. It was everything I'd dreamed of being able to provide for Sophie, everything I'd known I'd never be able to afford on my waitress salary. And it was a cage. Mr. Volkov will see you in his office at 2 o'clock, Katya continued, her voice pulling me back from the nursery. Until then, you're free to rest. Explore the suite or walk the grounds if you feel up to it. Lunch will be brought to your room at noon, unless you prefer to eat in the dining room. Here is fine. I managed to say. Katya nodded and left, closing the doors quietly behind her. I stood in the middle of the sitting room, surrounded by luxury I'd never imagined, feeling more alone than I'd felt lying on my kitchen floor waiting to die. I spent the next few hours exploring the suite, testing the reality of my new prison. The clothes in the closet were indeed my size. Not just my current size, but maternity clothes sized for the next 3 months of my pregnancy. Elegant dresses, comfortable pants, soft sweaters. Everything high quality, everything expensive. The bathroom had toiletries I recognized from department stores I'd window shopped but never entered. The nursery had a sound system with gentle lullabies programmed in. Alexei Volkov had thought of everything, which somehow made it worse. Lunch arrived at noon exactly, brought by a young woman who introduced herself as Maria, one of the kitchen staff. The food was restaurant quality, a delicate soup, a salad with grilled chicken, fresh bread, and fruit that actually tasted like fruit instead of the flavorless produce from my grocery store. At 1:45, I changed into one of the maternity dresses, a deep blue that Katya had laid out on the bed while I'd been exploring. It fit perfectly, falling to just below my knees, and somehow making me look elegant despite my swollen belly and exhausted face. Dmitri knocked at exactly 2 o'clock to escort me downstairs. Alexei's office was in the east wing, through a set of heavy wooden doors that Dmitri opened without knocking. The room beyond was masculine and intimidating. Dark wood paneling, built-in bookshelves, a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany. Windows overlooked the eastern grounds, where I could see men patrolling at regular intervals. Alexei stood at the window, his back to me, dressed in another impeccable suit, this one charcoal gray. He didn't turn when I entered, and Dmitri closed the doors, leaving us alone. "How are you feeling?" he asked, still looking out the window. "Like I'm living in a dream that might be a nightmare," I answered honestly. That made him turn. A slight smile played at his lips, but his eyes remained serious. "At least you're honest. Sit." It wasn't a request. I sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. He moved to his own chair, settling into it with that same predatory grace I was coming to associate with him. "We need to establish some ground rules," he said, his hands folding on the desk in front of him. "First, you don't leave the estate without my permission and without security. The men watching the perimeter aren't just for show. They're keeping threats out and you in." I nodded, having expected this. "Second, you speak to no one from your old life. That includes your mother, friends, former co-workers. As far as the world is concerned, Claire Donovan died with her husband. You're under my protection now, which means you're part of my household, subject to my rules." "You want me to just disappear?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "My mother will worry. She'll call the police. Your mother has already been informed that you've left the city for your safety and will contact her when you're able. She's been told that Marcus's gambling debts put you in danger and that you're being protected by friends." His expression hardened slightly. "She's also received notification that her medical bills have been paid in full and that she'll receive a monthly stipend for her care. She won't ask questions." The casual way he said it, as if buying my mother's silence was as simple as paying a bill, made my stomach turn. But I also couldn't deny the relief. My mother's cancer treatments had been eating through what little savings she had. At least now she'd be cared for. "Third," Alexei continued, "you'll attend family dinners when I require it. I have business associates, partners, people who need to see that I honor my commitments. You'll be introduced as someone under my protection. You'll dress appropriately, speak when spoken to, and reveal nothing about my business." "I don't know anything about your business," I pointed out, "and you'll keep it that way." His eyes held mine, intense and unyielding. "Fourth, and most important, you don't question my decisions. You don't argue with my security protocols. When I say something is for your safety or Sophie's, you trust that I know better than you do." The autocratic certainty in his voice sparked something rebellious in me. "And if I don't agree? Then you're welcome to leave." He leaned back in his chair, that slight smile returning. "Of course I won't be able to protect you or your daughter from the consequences. Victor's people are still looking. Marcus's other creditors are still looking. The moment you step outside my protection, you become a target again." It was the same impossible choice dressed in different words. Stay and submit, or leave and die. Fine, I said through clenched teeth. Any other rules I should know about? Several, but they can wait. He stood, walking around the desk. Instead of stopping at a professional distance, he came close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. You're angry. That's good. Anger means you're a fighter, and Sophie will need a fighter for a mother. Don't. The word came out sharper than I intended. Don't talk about her like you care. You're not doing this because you're a good person. You said so yourself. You're buying some kind of redemption for someone you couldn't save. We're just a means to an end. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. You're right, he said quietly. I'm not a good person, Claire. I've killed people. I've destroyed lives. I run an organization that profits from fear and violence, but I protect what's mine with everything I have. And like it or not, you and Sophie are mine now. The possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear. There was something almost tender in the way he said Sophie's name, something that contradicted everything else about him. I want to see the nursery plans, I said, changing the subject. I want to be involved in the decisions about my daughter's room. Of course. He returned to his desk, pulling out a tablet and bringing up what looked like architectural drawings. The room is already furnished, but if you want changes, they'll be made. I stood and walked around the desk to look at the screen, very aware of how close I had to stand to him to see properly. He smelled like cedar and something darker. Leather, maybe, and the faint scent of gun oil that I was learning to associate with the men who worked for him. The plans were detailed, showing not just the nursery I'd seen, but expansions that could be made as Sophie grew, a playroom, a bedroom suite for when she was older, even a small study. You're planning years ahead, I said softly. I always do. His voice was close to my ear, and I realized he'd shifted slightly, bracketing me against the desk without quite touching me. Sophie will grow up here, Claire. She'll be educated, protected, given every advantage. She'll never want for anything. Except freedom, I whispered. Freedom is overrated when you're dead. His hand came up, not touching me but hovering near my shoulder. You'll understand eventually. This world, my world. It's brutal and unforgiving, but inside these walls you're safe. Both of you. I turned to face him, which was a mistake because it brought us even closer together. I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his pupils dilated slightly as he looked at me. And what about when she grows up? I asked. When she wants to go to college, have friends, date, will she still be a prisoner then? She'll be protected, he said firmly. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. We stared at each other, the tension thick between us. Finally, he stepped back, giving me space to breathe. You should rest, he said, his voice returning to that cool, professional tone. Dr. Volkov will be by tomorrow to check on you. In the meantime, Katya can show you the rest of the house, answer any questions you have. It was a dismissal. I walked to the door, then paused, looking back at him. He'd returned to the window, his hands clasped behind his back, looking every inch the dangerous man he claimed to be. Alexei? I said, and his shoulders tensed slightly at my use of his first name. Thank you. For saving us. He didn't turn around. Don't thank me yet, Claire. You don't know what kind of life you've agreed to. I left the office with those words echoing in my mind, following Dmitri back upstairs to my beautiful cage, wondering what exactly I'd gotten Sophie and myself into. That night, I lay in the enormous bed, my hand on my stomach, feeling Sophie move inside me. Through the window, I could see the guards patrolling the grounds, their presence both comforting and terrifying. Somewhere in this massive house, Alexei Volkov was going about his evening, running his empire, planning whatever dangerous things men like him planned. And I was part of that now, bound to him by debt and necessity and the fragile life growing inside me. I'd escaped death only to find myself in a different kind of trap, one lined with silk and gold, but a trap nonetheless. Sophie kicked hard, as if in protest, and I pressed my hand more firmly against my belly. I know, I whispered. I know, baby girl. But we're alive. We're safe. That has to be enough. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Safety wasn't enough. Freedom mattered. Choice mattered. But those were luxuries I could no longer afford. The price of Sophie's life was my own. The days blurred into weeks, and November surrendered to December. The estate transformed with the season. Snow blanketing the grounds, evergreen wreaths appearing on doors, the scent of pine and cinnamon filling the halls. It would have been beautiful if I could forget it was a prison. I settled into a routine, though settled felt like the wrong word. Every morning, Maria brought breakfast to my suite. I'd eat while watching the sun rise over the snow-covered gardens, then spend an hour walking the interior hallways for exercise. Dr. Volkov's orders. The house was so vast I could walk for an hour and still discover new rooms, new hallways, new reminders of the world Alexei Volkov commanded. I saw him rarely in those first 2 weeks. Brief glimpses as he moved through the house with Dmitri or other men whose names I didn't know. Once, I'd come down to the library late at night, unable to sleep, and found him there, reading in a leather chair by the fireplace. He'd looked up, our eyes meeting for a long moment, but neither of us spoke. I'd grabbed a book and retreated to my room, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't want to examine. But on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after my arrival, everything changed. Katya appeared at my door with a garment bag and a serious expression. "Mr. Volkov requests your presence at dinner tonight, 8 o'clock. There will be guests, business associates. He asks that you wear this and join him in the formal dining room." My stomach nodded. This was the 4th rule he'd mentioned, attending family dinners, being displayed as proof of his protection. I'd known it was coming, but that didn't make it easier. The dress Katya had brought was stunning, a deep emerald green that somehow complemented my pregnancy rather than hiding it. The fabric was soft, expensive, falling in elegant lines that made me look almost regal despite my swollen belly. There were shoes too, low heels that wouldn't be dangerous in my condition, and jewelry. Real jewelry, I realized, holding up the diamond earrings, not costume pieces. "Mr. Volkov wants you to look the part," Katya said, reading my expression. "You're under his protection. That means something in this world. It means you're valuable, untouchable. The people coming tonight need to see that." I dressed carefully, my hands shaking slightly as I fastened the earrings. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the exhausted waitress who'd served pasta and smiled for tips just a month ago. This woman looked expensive, protected, dangerous by association. Dmitri came to escort me at 7:55. We descended the stairs to the first floor, and I could hear voices from the dining room, men speaking in Russian, the clink of glasses, low laughter that set my nerves on edge. Dmitri opened the doors, and conversation stopped. The formal dining room was intimidating, even empty. Filled with a dozen men in expensive suits, it felt like walking into a den of wolves. They all turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from curious to calculating to something darker I didn't want to name, but it was Alexei who captured my attention. He stood at the head of the table, a crystal glass in his hand, wearing a black suit that made him look like darkness personified. When our eyes met, something shifted in his expression. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction. He set down his glass and moved toward me with that predatory grace, and the other men seemed to fade into the background. "Claire." He took my hand, his touch warm and firm. "You look beautiful." It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered in that commanding tone that made it impossible to argue. He tucked my hand into the crook of his arm, anchoring me to his side as he turned to face the room. "Gentlemen, this is Claire Donovan. She and her daughter are under my personal protection. I trust you'll all treat them with a respect that deserves." The message was clear. Touch them and die. The men nodded, murmuring greetings in accented English. Alexei led me to a seat near his right hand, holding the chair for me with unexpected courtesy, before taking his own seat at the head of the table. Dinner was served immediately, course after course of food I barely tasted. The men spoke primarily in Russian, occasionally switching to English when including me in conversation. They asked polite questions, how I was feeling, when the baby was due, if I needed anything. I gave polite answers, very aware of Alexei's presence beside me, the way his attention never fully left me even when he was speaking to someone else. I was halfway through the main course when I felt it, a hand on my knee beneath the table. I froze, my fork stopping halfway to my mouth. The hand moved higher, fingertips pressing into my thigh with clear intent. I looked up sharply and met the eyes of the man seated to my right, Viktor Kozlov. I recognized him from Marcus's descriptions, and the fear in my husband's voice when he'd spoken that name. Viktor was in his 50s, with graying hair and cold eyes that reminded me of a shark. He smiled at me, his hand squeezing my thigh harder. "You're very beautiful," he said in heavily accented English, loud enough that others could hear, but pitched as a compliment. "Marcus was a fool to risk losing you." "Marcus was a fool in many ways," I managed to say, trying to shift away. His hand followed, grip tightening. I looked at Alexei, and what I saw in his face made my breath catch. His expression hadn't changed. He was still listening to the man on his left, still holding his wine glass with casual ease, but his eyes had gone completely black, and there was murder in them. "Viktor." Alexei's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. Everyone went silent. "Remove your hand from Claire's leg. Now." Viktor's smile didn't falter, but his hand disappeared immediately. "My apologies, Alexei. I meant no disrespect. I was simply touching something that belongs to me." Alexei set down his wine glass with controlled precision, which suggests you've forgotten the rules of this house. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The other men exchanged glances, some looking uncomfortable, others almost eager, as if sensing blood in the water. "It was an innocent gesture," Viktor said, but there was an edge to his voice now. "The girl is very beautiful. Surely you can't blame a man for noticing." "I can blame a man for acting on it." Alexei stood, and somehow the movement was more threatening than if he'd shouted. "Dmitri, escort Mr. Kozlov to the south parlor. We have matters to discuss." Dmitri appeared from his position near the wall, and 2 other guards materialized from the shadows. Viktor's face had gone pale, but he stood with as much dignity as he could muster. "This is unnecessary, Alexei. I apologize if I overstepped." "You did." Alexei's voice was ice. "And now you'll pay for it. Gentlemen, please continue your dinner. I'll return shortly." He left with Viktor and the guards, leaving me sitting at the table with 10 men who now stared at me with a mixture of wariness and newfound respect. The man across from me, younger with kind eyes, offered a slight smile. "You should eat," he said gently in English. "Mr. Volkov wouldn't want you to miss your meal because of Viktor's stupidity." But I couldn't eat. My hands were shaking, and Sophie was kicking frantically inside me as if sensing my distress. I pressed my hand to my stomach, trying to calm both of us. The minutes dragged by. The other men resumed their conversation, but it was muted now, careful. Finally, the doors opened and Alexei returned. Alone. He reclaimed his seat beside me, picking up his wine glass as if nothing had happened. But I noticed his knuckles were red, scraped. There was a small speck of blood on his white shirt cuff that he'd missed. "Viktor sends his apologies," Alexei said calmly, cutting into his steak. "He's decided to leave early. Business in the city, apparently. No one questioned this. No one asked where Viktor had gone, or what had happened in the south parlor. They simply nodded and continued eating." Alexei's hand found mine under the table, his fingers lacing through mine. The gesture was possessive and comforting all at once. He squeezed once, then released me, returning his attention to his dinner as if the last 15 minutes hadn't happened. But I couldn't stop staring at those scraped knuckles, at that speck of blood, and wondering what exactly he'd done to Viktor Kozlov for daring to touch me. Dinner ended mercifully soon after. The men departed one by one, each stopping to nod respectfully to me before leaving. When the last had gone, I stood on shaking legs, desperate to escape to my room. "Claire." Alexei's voice stopped me at the door. "Wait." I turned slowly. He'd stood as well, his jacket discarded over his chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal those tattooed forearms. In the candlelight from the table, he looked dangerous and beautiful and terrifying. "Come with me," he said, and it wasn't a request. He led me through the house to a room I'd never seen, a study smaller than his office, more intimate. A fire burned in the fireplace, and there was a single leather sofa facing it. He gestured for me to sit, then poured 2 glasses from a crystal decanter. Whiskey for himself, water for me. "You did well tonight," he said, handing me the water before settling into the chair across from me. Better than I expected for your first dinner." "What did you do to him?" The question burst out before I could stop it. "Victor, what did you do?" Alexei took a long sip of his whiskey, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. I reminded him of the consequences of touching what's mine. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You accepted my protection, Claire. That makes you mine. My responsibility, my ward, mine to protect. And in my world, people need to understand what that means." Victor needed to be reminded. "Did you kill him?" I whispered. "No." A slight smile played at his lips. "Though I considered it, Victor is useful in certain capacities, and his death would create complications I don't need right now, but he won't forget tonight. None of them will." The casual way he discussed violence, as if it were just another business decision, should have horrified me. Instead, I felt something else, a dark satisfaction that Victor had been punished for touching me, for making me feel powerless. What was happening to me? "You're safe here," Alexei said, as if reading my thoughts. "With me, you're safe." That's what tonight was about, showing everyone that you're under my protection, that touching you means answering to me by hurting him, I said. By teaching him. Alexei drained his whiskey and set the glass aside. "This is my world, Claire. It operates on different rules than the one you came from. Respect is earned through strength. Protection is maintained through fear. If I'd let Victor's insult slide, every man at that table would have seen weakness, would have thought they could take liberties with you." "So you hurt him to protect me," I said slowly, trying to understand this twisted logic. "I hurt him because he touched what's mine," Alexei corrected. "The protection is just a consequence." We stared at each other across the firelight, and I saw something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Possession, yes, but also something deeper. Something almost like need. "Why does it matter so much?" I asked softly. "I'm nobody. Just a waitress you saved because of some debt my dead husband owed. Why do you care if someone touches me?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 7 years ago, the woman I loved was killed in a crossfire between rival organizations. She was innocent, just someone who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I couldn't protect her because I was careless, because I underestimated threats, because I wasn't strong enough. His jaw tightened, and I saw genuine pain flicker across his face. I swore I'd never let that happen again. Never let someone under my protection be harmed because of my weakness. "So I'm a replacement," I said, the words tasting bitter. "A second chance to save someone you couldn't save before." "No." He stood, moving to the fireplace, his back to me. "You're not a replacement, Claire. You're different." She was part of my world, knew the risks. "You're innocent in all this. You and Sophie. You're something clean in a dirty world. Something worth protecting." The way he said Sophie's name, with that same gentleness I'd noticed before, made something twist in my chest. This dangerous man, this killer who'd just beaten someone for touching me, spoke about my unborn daughter with tenderness. "I should go," I said, standing. "It's late, and I'm tired." "Of course." He turned, and the vulnerability I'd seen was gone, replaced by his usual controlled expression. "Dmitri will escort you upstairs." But at the door, I paused. "Alexei, thank you. For what you did tonight. I know you said I shouldn't thank you, but I am anyway." Something flickered in his eyes. "Get some rest, Claire. Tomorrow we'll discuss the security protocols for when the baby comes." I left him standing by the fire, his shadow long against the wall, and climbed the stairs to my cage with my heart pounding and Sophie kicking frantically inside me. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep, replaying the evening in my mind. Victor's hand on my leg, Alexei's black eyes, the blood on his cuff, the way he'd called me his, and the way my body had responded to that possessiveness. I was in danger, I realized. Not from Victor or Marcus's other creditors or any external threat. I was in danger of forgetting that my protector was also my captor, of confusing gratitude with something else, of mistaking possession for care. But as Sophie kicked against my hand and I stared at the ceiling of my beautiful prison, I couldn't quite convince myself that what I felt was wrong. Maybe captivity, when gilded enough, stopped feeling like imprisonment. Or maybe I was just too tired to fight anymore. Sophie arrived 3 weeks early, on a frozen January morning, when the world outside was buried under 2 feet of snow. I woke at 4 a.m. to wetness between my legs and a contraction that stole my breath. For a moment, I lay there in the darkness, my hand pressed to my stomach, trying to convince myself it was false labor. But then another contraction came, harder than the first, and I knew. It was time. I managed to reach the phone beside my bed, pressing the button Katya had shown me for emergencies. Within minutes, my room was flooded with people, Katya in a robe, Dmitri still alert despite the hour, and Dr. Volkov appearing with a medical bag as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "How far apart are the contractions?" Dr. Volkov asked, her hands gentle as she examined me. "Maybe 5 minutes," I gasped as another one hit. "Is it too early? Is she going to be okay?" 37 weeks is full term, Dr. Volkov assured me. "She's just eager to meet you. We have everything prepared. The medical suite downstairs is ready." They helped me into a wheelchair. I tried to protest that I could walk, but another contraction proved me wrong. As Dmitri pushed me toward the hallway, I saw him. Alexei stood in the doorway, still dressed in the clothes he'd worn the previous evening, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. His eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. "Is she—" he started. "The baby's coming," Dr. Volkov said calmly. "Everything is proceeding normally. Mr. Volkov, if you'd like to wait in— I'm coming with her." His voice left no room for argument. "Dr." Volkov's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. Alexei fell into step beside the wheelchair, his hand finding mine and holding it with surprising gentleness, as we made our way through the house to the medical suite I'd never seen. The room was a fully equipped delivery suite, complete with monitors and equipment that looked like it belonged in a top hospital. Dr. Volkov had 2 nurses with her, both professional, both efficient. They helped me into a gown and onto the bed, hooking me up to monitors that showed Sophie's heartbeat, strong and steady. "You should go," I told Alexei between contractions. "You don't need to be here for this. I'm not leaving." He pulled a chair close to the bed, still holding my hand. "I told you. I protect what's mine. That includes being here for this." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and exhaustion. Labor progressed faster than expected. Dr. Volkov said first babies usually took longer, but Sophie apparently had her own timeline. Alexei stayed through all of it, his hand never leaving mine, his presence somehow anchoring me through the worst moments. At one point, during a particularly brutal contraction, I screamed and squeezed his hand hard enough that I heard bones crack. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. When the contraction passed and I looked at him apologetically, he just smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. At 10:47 a.m., Sophie Rose Donovan entered the world screaming her displeasure at the cold and the light and everything else. Dr. Volkov placed her on my chest, and I felt my entire world shift and realign around this tiny, perfect creature. She had dark hair plastered to her head, Marcus's nose, and when she finally opened her eyes, they were gray, the same shade as Alexei's. No, that was impossible. Just a trick of the light, the newborn blue that would change in the coming weeks. I was exhausted, seeing things that weren't there, but when I looked up at Alexei, standing beside the bed, staring down at Sophie with an expression of wonder, I saw him notice it too. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, confusion, then something darker I couldn't read. "She's perfect," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made my breath catch. His finger reached out, and Sophie's tiny hand wrapped around it instinctively. "Hello, little one. Welcome home." The possessiveness in those 2 words should have frightened me. Instead, with Sophie warm and alive in my arms, and Alexei standing guard beside us, I felt safe for the first time in months. Dr. Volkov and her team cleaned Sophie, weighed her, 6 pounds, 8 ounces, measured her, 19 inches, and proclaimed her perfectly healthy despite being 3 weeks early. Then they handed her back to me, swaddled in a soft pink blanket, and left us alone. Alexei hadn't moved from his position beside the bed. He watched Sophie with an intensity that was almost unnerving. His usual controlled expression cracked open to reveal something raw underneath. "Thank you," I said softly. "For being here. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His eyes lifted to mine. "She's part of my household now. That makes her my responsibility." But the way he looked at her suggested it was more than responsibility. There was something almost tender in his expression, something that made me remember what he'd said about the woman he'd loved, about never letting anyone under his protection be harmed again. The weeks that followed Sophie's birth were the strangest of my life. I existed in a bubble of new motherhood. My world narrowed to feeding schedules and diaper changes and the exhausting, beautiful chaos of caring for a newborn. Katya assigned 2 nannies to help me, Maria and a younger woman named Irina, but I was fiercely protective of Sophie, insisting on doing most of her care myself. Alexei surprised me by being a constant presence. He'd appear in the nursery at odd hours, checking on us with an intensity that went beyond mere obligation. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m. to feed Sophie, and find him standing in the doorway, watching us with those gray eyes that Sophie seemed to have inherited. "You should be sleeping," he'd say. "So should you," I'd counter. But he'd stay anyway, sitting in the rocking chair while I fed Sophie, his presence somehow comforting in the darkness. One night, about 2 weeks after Sophie's birth, I found him holding her. I'd put her down for the night and gone to shower. But when I returned, Alexei was in the nursery, Sophie cradled in his arms while he paced slowly beside her crib. He was murmuring to her in Russian, his voice soft and gentle, and Sophie was staring up at him with those gray eyes, completely content. "She was fussy," he said when he noticed me, but he didn't immediately hand her over. I heard her crying. "You don't have to," I started, but he shook his head. "I want to." He looked down at Sophie, and the expression on his face made something in my chest tighten. "She deserves to know she's protected. That she's safe." I moved closer, and we stood there together in the dim light of the nursery, both of us looking down at this tiny life we were somehow responsible for. Sophie yawned, her little fists stretching, and something about the moment felt impossibly intimate. "Alexei," I said softly, "why are you really doing this? All of this? The protection, the care, being here with us. It's more than just clearing a debt or making up for someone you couldn't save. What do you want from us?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes still on Sophie. Then, "I want to give her the childhood I never had. Safety, security, the knowledge that she's valued and protected." His jaw tightened. "I grew up in violence, Claire. My father was killed when I was 7. My mother died 2 years later. I learned to survive by becoming harder, colder, more dangerous than anyone else. I built an empire on fear and blood." He finally looked at me, and I saw the vulnerability there, carefully controlled but present. "But with Sophie, I can be different. I can protect instead of destroy. I can build instead of tear down. She doesn't need to know what I am, what I do. She just needs to know she's safe. And me?" I whispered. "Where do I fit in this?" His free hand came up, cupping my face with surprising gentleness. "You're her mother. You're the one who'll teach her kindness and strength and all the things I can't. You're the light in the darkness I've created." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone. "You're essential." The touch sent electricity through me. We were standing so close I could feel the heat of his body, smell that cedar cologne mixed with something uniquely him. Sophie cooed between us, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "This is dangerous," I said, but I didn't pull away. "Everything about my life is dangerous." His eyes searched mine. "But you're safe with me, Claire. You and Sophie both. I swear it. You can't promise that. You said yourself your world is violent. Which is why I'll never let it touch either of you." His hand slid from my face to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. "You're mine to protect. Mine to keep safe. Mine." The possessiveness should have frightened me. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, into the security he offered, into the dangerous comfort of belonging to someone who would destroy the world to keep me safe. "This is insane," I whispered. "Probably." A slight smile played at his lips. "But sanity is overrated." He kissed me then, carefully because of Sophie between us, but with an intensity that stole my breath. It was nothing like kissing Marcus had been, nothing safe or comfortable or expected. This was fire and danger and the taste of something forbidden. When we broke apart, Sophie was watching us with those two wise gray eyes, and I couldn't help but laugh softly. "I think she approves," Alexei murmured, and the tenderness in his voice as he looked at my daughter made something in my heart crack open. This was wrong. I knew it was wrong. He was a criminal, a killer, the man who'd bought my freedom with violence and fear. But he was also the man who'd saved my life, who held my daughter with reverence, who looked at me like I was something precious instead of just a debt to be paid. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, carefully placing Sophie back in her crib. "We raise her together. We give her everything she deserves. And we see where this goes. I'm not ready for—" I gestured between us, unable to find the words. "I know." He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me with surprising gentleness. "We have time, Claire. All the time in the world. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." It should have sounded like a threat. Instead, it sounded like a promise. The months that followed were a strange dance of domesticity and danger. Alexei taught me about his world, not the violent parts, but enough that I understood the stakes, the threats we faced. He showed me the security measures in place, introduced me to the men who guarded us, made sure I knew how to protect Sophie if anything ever went wrong, but mostly, we were just a family. Twisted and unconventional, built on debt and violence and protection, but a family nonetheless. We had dinners together, the three of us in the small dining room rather than the formal one. We celebrated Sophie's milestones, her first smile, her first laugh, the way she'd reach for Alexei when he entered a room. My mother's health improved with the better care Alexei's money provided. I was allowed carefully monitored phone calls with her, brief conversations where I lied about my new life and pretended everything was normal. She knew I was lying, but she also knew I was safe, and maybe that was enough. Viktor Kozlov disappeared entirely. Rumor had it he'd been reassigned to operations in Eastern Europe, far from Alexei's territory. None of the other men who'd attended that dinner ever touched me or looked at me with anything but respect. And slowly, carefully, I fell in love with my captor. It happened in small moments, the way he'd hold Sophie at 3 a.m. so I could sleep, the way he'd absently kiss my forehead when he passed me in the hallway, the way he'd sit with me in the library and read while I worked on the art history research he'd encouraged me to restart. He gave me freedom within the boundaries of his protection, space to breathe within the cage he'd built. One night, 6 months after Sophie's birth, I found him in his office long after everyone else had gone to bed. He looked exhausted, the weight of his empire evident in the set of his shoulders. "Come to bed," I said from the doorway. He looked up, and something in his expression shifted. "Your bed or mine?" It was the first time he'd asked, the first time he'd pushed beyond the careful boundaries we'd maintained. "Ours," I said, and watched as his eyes darkened. He stood, crossing to me in 3 long strides, his hands cupping my face as he kissed me with months of restrained hunger. "Are you sure?" he asked against my lips. "No," I admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." He laughed, the sound rough and genuine, and swept me into his arms, carrying me through the house to the master suite I'd never entered. The room was masculine and elegant, with windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds and a bed large enough for both of us and the monsters we'd carry into it. We made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies with the reverence of something sacred. And afterward, lying in his arms with Sophie sleeping peacefully in her nursery next door, I finally understood what had happened to me. I'd been saved by a monster and learned to love the man beneath the violence. I'd been captured and chose to stay. I'd lost my freedom and gained something more valuable: safety, security, and the terrifying, beautiful knowledge that I was cherished. "I love you," I whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around me. "I know." I've loved you since the moment I carried you out of that apartment, fighting to stay alive for your daughter. You were the bravest thing I'd ever seen. This is insane, I said again, but I was smiling. Sanity is overrated, he repeated, and I felt him smile against my hair. Besides, you're mine now, completely, and I take care of what's mine. The possessiveness still made me shiver, but now it was anticipation rather than fear. Morning came with Sophie's cries demanding attention. Alexei and I dressed and went to her together, lifting her from her crib and bringing her back to our bed. She laughed and kicked between us, reaching for both of us with chubby hands, and in that moment, I saw our future stretched out before us. It wouldn't be normal. It wouldn't be safe in the traditional sense. But it would be ours. This strange, fierce family, built on impossible circumstances and dangerous love. What are you thinking? Alexei asked, watching me watch Sophie. That I should be horrified by all of this, I admitted. That I should want to escape, to take Sophie and run and never look back. But you don't. Not a question. No. I looked at him. This beautiful, dangerous man who'd become my world, because running means losing you. And I can't do that. I won't. He kissed me then, deeply, with Sophie giggling between us. When he pulled back, his gray eyes were soft. You'll never have to. You're home, Claire, both of you. Forever in a gilded cage with a man who'd kill to protect us. Forever in a world of danger and violence and twisted love. Forever bound to someone who saw me not as a possession, but as something precious. It wasn't the life I'd imagined. But as I sat there with Alexei and Sophie, watching the winter sun rise over the estate, I realized it was the life I'd chosen. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. The girl who'd been poisoned by her husband and saved by a mafia boss was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that sometimes salvation comes from the darkest places, that love can bloom in impossible soil, and that freedom means nothing if you're not alive to enjoy it. I was Claire Volkov now, in everything but name, and I was finally, impossibly, home.